Continuing on in video 2 of The Clue in the Crumbling Wall by Catherine Keene, Nancy Drew. And here we are. As Nancy and the officer went up the flagstone walk, the policewoman called attention to 4 rose bushes newly planted beside the sagging porch. "Are these yours?" she asked. "They look like the ones we lost," Nancy admitted, "but please, I don't want to get a child into trouble." She broke off because a little girl in a faded pink dress had just come around a corner of the house. Seeing the woman in uniform, she stopped short and turned as if to run off. "Don't be afraid," the lieutenant said kindly. "Did you come to take me away?" the little girl asked. "Indeed we didn't, Joan, but I'm afraid we'll have to send you off to a special school, unless you decide to be good." "I am good," Joan said, tossing her blonde, tangled curls. "Just ask my mother." "In many ways you are very good. I know you work hard and you take care of your mother. But why do you dig up shrubs and plants that don't belong to you?" Joan's gaze roved to the telltale rose bushes. She hung her head and did not answer. "I'm sure you don't really mean to be naughty," went on the policewoman. "Why do you take flowers?" "Because they're pretty," Joan said with a trace of defiance. "We can never buy anything nice." Sinking down on the porch steps, the child began to cry. The young policewoman comforted her. Soon she gained an admission from the little girl that an older boy, Jetty Hooker, who lived next door, had suggested that Joan help herself to the rose bushes. I didn't know why I did it," the little girl sobbed. "I wish my Aunt Floriana would come home. Then we could have nice things." In an undertone, Lieutenant Masters explained to Nancy that Aunt Floriana, whose real name was Flossie Johnson, had been missing many years. The woman, a talented dancer, had disappeared while on a vacation trip. "Joan only knows about her aunt from her mother," the lieutenant added. "Mrs. Fenimore wasn't married when her sister disappeared. Since Mr. Fenimore's death, she has been ill and has had very little money. It's too bad Floriana can't be found, so she might help her." "It's a shame," said Nancy soberly. "Did she run away deliberately?" "Come inside and let Mrs. Fenimore tell you the story herself," the policewoman suggested. Nancy received a distinct shock as Joan led the callers into the living room of the house. Lying on a faded couch was a sweet-faced woman with deep lines of suffering on her forehead. The Drew girl was sure Mrs. Fenimore was not more than 30 years old, yet she looked 50. "I'm glad to meet you, Miss Drew," she said in a soft voice. "Please pardon such an ungracious way of receiving you. But my illness—" "I'm sorry you're not feeling well," Nancy replied. "Perhaps it would be better if I came some other time." No. If you feel strong enough, Mrs. Fenimore," said Lieutenant Masters, "I wish you would tell Miss Drew about your sister's disappearance. She was asking me whether you think Floriana dropped out of sight deliberately." "I can't believe it of Flossie. That's what I always call her. She took the name of Floriana when she became a dancer," explained the woman. "She went away for a month's rest and was never heard of again." "If Aunt Floriana would come home, we'd live in a castle," Joan blurted out. "We'd have beautiful gardens and everything nice. Aunt Floriana would be rich." At Nancy's look of surprise, Mrs. Fenimore explained that the dancer had been engaged to a wealthy manufacturer named Walter Heath. 5 years after her strange disappearance, he had died, leaving Heath Castle and the rest of his estate to her. "There's a provision in the will which keeps me from collecting my sister's inheritance," said Mrs. Fenimore. "You see, Mr. Heath tied up the property by stipulating that if Floriana did not return to claim the estate within 5 years, the grounds were to be converted into a county park." "Where's the property located?" asked Nancy. "Several miles up the Muskoka River. The place is called Heath Castle. Once it was a very beautiful estate with walled gardens and sunken pools. Now I'm told it looks more like a jungle." "Legally, the property still belongs to Floriana?" Nancy inquired. "It does for the next 3 weeks. After that, she loses all claim to it. Oh, I do wish for Joan's sake my sister would come back." "Mr. Heath tried to trace Floriana before his death," Lieutenant Masters revealed. but the detectives he engaged failed to turn up a single clue. The story deeply interested Nancy. She shrewdly guessed that the policewoman had hoped to intrigue her with details of the case. Confirming this suspicion, the young woman officer suggested that the girl might find it worth her while to visit Heath Castle soon. Before they left the cottage, Nancy and Miss Masters helped Joan prepare some supper. Wishing to spare Mrs. Fenimore any embarrassment, they refrained from discussing Joan's latest escapade. The circumstances which had caused the petty theft continued to trouble Nancy, however. That night at dinner, she told the story to the housekeeper, regretting that her father was not at home to hear it. The following day, she repeated it to her friends, Bess Marvin and George Fane. The two girls, who were cousins, were particularly interested in the part dealing with Heath Castle. "What are we waiting for?" George cried enthusiastically. "Why not go there right away and explore the place?" "Will it be safe?" asked Bess cautiously. "It won't be an easy trip," Nancy warned her friends. "The estate is several miles from here, and I'm told the undergrowth is like a jungle. The best way to get there is by motorboat up the Muskoka River." 20 minutes later, the three girls rented a motorboat at Campbell's Landing. The old craft leaked a bit, and the engine clattered and threw oil. "Lucky we all know how to swim," Bess said with some misgiving as they pulled away from the dock. "I have a feeling this old tub may sink before we go very far." "We'll be all right if George does her stuff with the baler," Nancy laughed, heading the craft upstream. The river was wide near town, but the upper reaches were narrow and twisted and turned at such sharp angles that fast travel was out of the question. At the steering wheel, Nancy kept an alert watch for stumps and shoals. "It's really pretty along here, but so wild," Bess commented, her gaze wandering along the solid line of trees fringing the shores. "Better forget the scenery for a while," Nancy advised, "and give George a hand with the bailing. If you don't, our shoes will be soaked." At the bow of the boat, water was slowly seeping in. Both Bess and George fell to work, vigorously dipping it out. They became so absorbed in what they were doing that they no longer watched the shore. "Listen," Nancy presently said. "What was that?" Bess and George had heard no unusual sound, but they stood up to look around. "A motorboat!" Nancy exclaimed. "Oh, now you can hear the engine plainly, but where is it?" As she spoke, a small blue and white painted craft shot out from one of the river's many hidden tributaries. Until that moment, it had been screened from view by overhanging branches. "Look out!" Bess cried in alarm. The man in the oncoming boat had not seen the girls. At high speed, he raced straight toward their little craft. Desperately, Nancy spun the wheel. There was not enough space to clear. With a splintering crash, the two boats collided. Chapter 3: A Runaway Boat. The speeding boat, which had struck Nancy's craft, veered sharply away and raced downstream. "Hey, wait!" George shouted angrily at the reckless pilot. "You damaged our boat! Nancy, go after him! Don't let him get away!" Nancy, however, was busy with another problem. When the crash had come, she had seen Bess lose her balance, strike her head on the side of the boat, and topple into the water. If Bess were unconscious, there was no time to lose. Nancy instantly turned off the motor, located the spot where her friend had gone down, and dived in. Grasping the stunned girl under the shoulders with her left arm, she struck out with the other for the boat. George leaned over and helped pull the unconscious victim aboard. "Is she—" her cousin began in a terrified voice. At this moment, Bess opened her eyes and coughed several times. Nancy thumped her on the back. "I'm all right," Bess said weakly. "Our boat—" She tried to point. For the first time, the others realized that the water was filling the craft at an alarming rate from a small hole in the side. "Quick, George, bail!" shouted Nancy. George picked up the can she had been using before and started to work. Nancy leaped forward, crumbling up the newspaper lying in the bottom of the boat, and stuffed it into the hole. Looking into a tackle box near her, she discovered a burlap sack, which she rolled up and added to the paper. In a moment, the influx of rushing water was stayed. "Good," panted George, sitting down. "Now we can chase the other boat." It was not in sight, however, and Nancy wisely decided it would be useless to try to pursue the speedier craft. She turned her attention to Bess. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Oh, All right, I guess, but I'd like to go home. We'll go right away, decided Nancy. I'm a sight myself, and this boat can't stand much more. I wish we hadn't lost the fellow who ruined it, said George. If I ever see him, she added angrily. Would you recognize him? Asked Nancy. George confessed that she would not and inquired if the others would. Bess had not noticed him, but Nancy replied, I didn't see him very well, but I believe I'd know him if we ever meet again. At any rate, I'm going to keep my eyes open for both him and the boat. The girls dreaded to return to Campbell's Landing with their damaged craft, but the owner was not disagreeable about the matter. It won't cost more than $10 to repair it, he assured them. I'll do the work myself. Nancy promised to pay him, and he added, You better hunt for that scoundrel who hit you and make him give you the money. He ain't got no right running into folks that way. Discouraged that the trip to Heath Castle had been a failure, Nancy took her friends home, then went to her own house. The following day found her still without a clue to the identity of the unknown boatman. Though she described his blue and white craft to several persons, no one was able to identify it. Then suddenly she thought of someone who might. Old Me Hardy, she told Hannah Gruen. I believe I'll hike down to his place on the river and chat with him. Taking Bess along for company, she proceeded toward the river. As the girls approached the docks, they observed a dark-haired, beady-eyed stranger coming up the boardwalk. Instantly, Nancy was struck by his resemblance to the man who had crashed into her boat. She stopped to speak to him, inquiring if he were not the one who had caused the collision. No, I'm not, the man snapped. I don't even own a boat. Glaring at the girls, he walked on hurriedly. The unpleasant encounter disheartened Nancy, and she was silent until they reached Me Hardy's little home. Then her spirits revived. The place was very quaint. Once it had been a small, well-appointed yacht. Now it was a beached wreck, weathered by sun and rain. Its only claim to any former glory was the flag, which flew proudly from the afterdeck. Anyone home? Nancy called, cupping her hands. Come in, invited the old sailor in a loud voice. He was sitting inside the cabin with his feet on a built-in table, eating a lunch of baked beans out of a tin can and some tomatoes. Seeing the girls, he got to his feet, greatly pleased to receive their call. You honor me coming here, he said, his blue eyes twinkling, but I'm going to have to disappoint you. I've nary a clam today. Too lazy to go out and dig 'em, I guess. Oh, we didn't come to buy clams, Nancy replied, glancing curiously about the inside of the yacht, which she had never seen before. The room was small and cluttered, but very clean. The Hardy's bunk was neatly made, and on a shelf above it was displayed an amazing array of seashells. I collect 'em, the sailor explained, following Nancy's gaze. Some of these shells came from Puget Sound, and some from the South Pacific. Hobbling over to the shelf, he pointed to a curious-looking specimen. That's called the washboard clam. It's one of the biggest of our river clams.